It seemed like it might have been a few days or very shortly after my then husband was arrested for domestic violence. And in our small town in Maine, there were headlines around the world, but it was the headlines in my local town paper that really were devastating. Headlines of the domestic violence arrest. So I was mortified. I was so embarrassed. I felt like, in the 30 years that we lived in this town, had a castle in the air, basically. Probably looked at, I thought, as sort of a golden couple. So I was staying home and not really going out, but I had to get my hair done. And so I went to my hairdresser, Kate, and I had been going to her for many, many years. And I sat there, and she pointed out after that I used to always sit and open the newspaper, and we didn't used to really talk too much. But when I sat down, she was like the first person that I almost had seen since the arrest. And she put her hand on my arm very gently, and she just said, "I've been there." And then she said, "I've always wanted to tell my story."
Welcome to the Persistence U podcast with Lisbeth. That's you as in university, but we're really much more of a community here. Your host is Lisbeth Meredith. She's an author, speaker, and online teacher. Each week, she'll be delivering amazing stories from survivors and thrivers, all threaded together with a dose of persistence. We're so glad you're listening.
Sisters and brothers, I am so thankful to have connected with Patrisha McLean. I did that through my author friend Heidi Love of Laughing at the Sky, and she was my previous podcast guest, as well as a dear writer friend for the past many years. And so thank you, Heidi, for connecting me with Patrisha, who does amazing things. Patrisha McLean is the founder and CEO of Finding Our Voices. And she is an author, a photojournalist, a civil rights advocate, and definitely someone who cares about women and safety within the home. Patrisha was married once to someone very famous. I encourage you to look up her name, Google it. And that relationship turned out to be quite violent. It's a special kind of isolation when you're married to someone that the entire world loves, and you want to say things aren't quite what they seem. So to Google Patrisha, Patrisha, McLean, McLean. Anyway, I'm going to introduce you to Patrisha. There's more to her story, but we're on a time crunch. I'm just so thankful that you're here, and enjoy this conversation, please. And really, this is just such an honor. And Patrisha, thank you for being here today on Persistence U. Despite the fact that you're having outages and such like that, you still made it. So thank you. I'm really jazzed to be with you this afternoon.
Well, thank you so much. You were a hugely popular guest on our book club. So it is.
I loved it. Thank you.
Kind of reversed at this point with you asking the questions.
Yes, it was so much fun to be on Finding Our Voices book club, be that guest author. And I just encourage people, no matter, if you like memoir and you like stories of survivors, this is a virtual book club that you've helped create that just is wonderful and vibrant, and that everyone can go to if they wanted to.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So thank you. How was it in your life? I gave a little bit of an introduction, but do you remember a specific time or in the journey of you moving from being, frankly, a victim to survivor? When did you know that you wanted to create a beautiful masterpiece and serve other women who were experiencing intimate partner violence?
I think if I had to pick a moment, it would be it seemed like it might have been a few days or very shortly after my then husband was arrested for domestic violence. And in our small town in Maine, there were headlines around the world, but it was the headlines in my local town paper that really were devastating. Headlines of the domestic violence arrest. So I was mortified. I was so embarrassed. I felt like, in the 30 years that we lived in this town, we had a castle in the air, basically. Probably looked at, I thought, as sort of a golden couple and family. So was staying. I didn't want to go out. I just didn't want to see anybody. my ex had also told me that if anything ever happened to us, like if I left him or something, that people would gloat. And so I sort of thought that that could be a reaction too. Like people would say, oh yeah, they thought they were so great. So I don't know, there were all kinds of things around that. I thought that people really only liked me because of him. It was just on and on.
Sure.
So I was staying home and not really going out, but I had to get my hair done. And so I went to my hairdresser, Kate, and I had been going to her for many, many years. And I sat there and she pointed out after that I used to always like sit and open the newspaper and we didn't used to really talk too much. But when I sat down, she was like the first person that I almost had seen since the arrest. And she put her hand on my arm very gently and she just said, I've been there. And then she said, I've always wanted to tell my story.
Wow, that is powerful. So she just let you know you were not alone in your experience and that she too had something to unpack.
Yeah. And I was a photojournalist. And so this is what was the spark for what is now Finding Our Voices, as far as a woman who wanted to come out of the shadows of misplaced shame and provide a platform and let everyone know how much there is around them. So nobody else feels the isolation and shame, and confusion that I did. And Kate too.
Wow, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful that she said that she was with you, and that from that moment, something sparked in you.
Yeah.
How did you, rewinding just a little bit, early on when you met the person that became your husband, probably it seemed so amazing, like it did for me when I met the person who became my husband within 90 days. Not proud, just saying, but how did you get into that relationship? And when you started dissecting it after you left, what were some of the signs that you want people to know about, that Finding Your Voices helps people understand?
Well, just referencing something you said, I mean, when things move very quickly, that is a red flag. And
Right.
if things are moving very quickly, it's just a good idea to say, wait, like, let's take our time and not worry that you're going to lose them by slowing it down. And also, what's the rush? And if they are trying to rush it, like, what's behind that? Like that is a red flag right there. Like over and over again, I hear from women, swept you off your feet. Like they really, they want to close the deal like very quickly.
Right.
So yeah, you said 90 days. I mean, first of all, he told me he loved me the first night we met. Like at the time, wow, that's amazing. It's so romantic. He doesn't know me. Like, why would I even be flattered about that? He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't know anything about me. And then pretty immediately talking about, me packing up. I was working as a reporter out west. He lived out east. I'm going to quit my job, sell my car, move back east with him. But I think it's partly like movies and popular culture that make it sound like this whirlwind thing, like spontaneity, like it's so romantic and a whirlwind thing. Not a good idea. Not a good
Yes,
idea. To
we know that
upend
in hindsight.
to upend your whole life, because everyone is going to put their best foot forward in the beginning, even people who aren't psychopaths or sociopaths. So,
Right.
slow down, get to know each other. And then, so that was a red flag. And then I guess the other thing, well, when we first met, first night, he was just downing double scotches. Like we met it was after his show, asked me to come up, join him for a drink. I'm going to have to plug in my phone. Sorry, I'm on the phone because of this power outage, but you know what? Since there's no power, it's not working maybe we'll talk as long as we can before the power goes out. But he was downing double scotches, and that is a red flag. You have a drink, you order a drink, you drink a drink, but double scotches like one after the other. And alcohol, like he was an alcoholic, and that figured very prominently in the 29 years. It wasn't the excuse for what he did to me, but it certainly was not a good thing. And then if there was another red flag, I would say, yeah, like we met in August. In October, I was packing up to move back east with him. And after I quit my job, after I had sold my car, given up my apartment, I saw his temper for the first time while I was packing up to move back east with him. So right there, I should have stopped and paid attention. But by then, everything's in motion, and it would have been hard to go back at that point.
It's always easier to know in hindsight also, because things like moving, things like change and new relationships can bring out our worst, even in decent people. But at the time when, especially when you're young, you may think, this is going to be fine. I just need to not be so stressful on this person. And I just need to be patient. And I just need to, so it makes sense that you don't just throw everything away and say, oh, I'm out. But
Yeah, because for you, like all the excuses you must have made for him too, right? Like we make
right,
it for them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think one of the things when I look back that, because I wrote in my book about, as much as I could with the memory as if I was going through it presently, I didn't write it in past tense, I wrote in present tense. But when I think about some of my friends' concerns, I didn't want to hear it really. Very few people spoke up, but I also didn't want to hear it because I was young and headstrong and someone loved me. And that was unusual.
Oh, so
In my mind, that was very unusual. So I didn't want to wreck that.
yeah.
Because there was someone who was going to take care of me.
Yeah, and me too. And I really think another thing to transmit an important message. And by the way, if I do run out of power, I could go in my car and I could get my car going. So if I run out of power, I'll just go to my car and plug it in. The other thing I think is really important, that if you feel like you're lucky that they love you or you're lucky to have them, I just feel that's a time to really stop and take a pause, because that's dangerous, and that just shows like lack of self-esteem, and that's what gets you in. I think that's what got me in trouble. Like I overlooked a lot of things because I did feel I was so lucky to have him, and I didn't want to think about not having him because like I couldn't find anyone, like on and on.
Right. Absolutely. That makes sense. That totally makes sense. I just like for people to hear, it's always easy to look back and see these things, but if someone's in the middle of it, they shouldn't feel bad or that they're the only ones who got with somebody who overwhelmed them with their charm and wanted to have a quick commitment. And then when you agree to that, suddenly you start seeing other things, but you don't want to acknowledge it because you've given up so much, your job, your home, or whatever it is, pieces of your identity to make this work, that it simply can't be true, because then
Like,
it would have
yeah,
been a waste,
like look at all the people, like financial scams, like you're losing money, you're giving money out, and then there's a moment you're like, oh, this doesn't seem right. But how many people, like, you cannot face the fact that this person really built you, so you're in denial, like so that it's sort of similar.
Right. Exactly. Very similar. I was scammed a few years ago, just a little money, but it had that same feeling of why didn't I see this and what's wrong with me, and all of those things triggered all over again. It has to be a little bit more isolating, though, when you are with someone who, from the outside, the world might think is the pinnacle of success in some fashion and is well known. It would be extra, frankly, humiliating or embarrassing to go through it. So isolation being a big part of why people have a hard time accessing resources or getting out and staying out successfully of a bad relationship. Can you speak to
Well,
that a
yeah,
little bit?
the image, like the photos that we had of us in magazines, like it was all so idyllic. It's like now what you see on Instagram and what people post, but the magazine layouts about our golden glorious life, and then it was also feeling like he was exceptional in also like having to make excuses for him because of the fame and this, that, and the other thing. But so I feel like that was part of it too. Like no one could, like the fact that when I would early on, he couldn't be around people and do errands like normal people. And so he would like take me to the store to go grocery shopping, and I would like have to run in the store and dash around and be back like really, really fast, or else like honk his horn at me. But I would just put it to the fact that, it was the fame, that made him that way. So,
Right.
but again, I feel like a lot of these things are universal. So I think everybody who goes through this is going to be making excuses for the person based on what is happening with that individual.
It makes sense. It totally makes sense. So when you finally, how long was the relationship before you had left, before it ended?
It was 29 years.
That's a long time. That
Yeah.
really is. What was it like to pick up the pieces and start living life on your own terms?
Well, I found it did get harder before it got better. So that's
Yes.
a common misconception that people think you escape, you get out, everything's great. Did you relate to that? Did you feel it went?
Oh, mine was horrible for years until my kids were kidnapped. So probably 10 years of an aftermath for me that were, really kind of
And
scary.
the financial struggle and the ramped up scariness of the abuse for you, both things would you?
Right. Right. Financial, there's you had children in common, correct?
Yes, but they were grown.
Good, good, good. And that still has its own issues,
It definitely does. Yeah, it definitely does. So I would say that it got a lot worse before it got better, and it was just a very tumultuous. It was just a total. I mean, I just felt the word sinking. I just think sinking. I was sinking. I was absolutely sinking. And the worst part is that he seemed to be soaring. And just to say for you, if you don't mind, when you were on our book club, mentioned there was never accountability for the crimes that he committed to you, both in the relationship and with your children and the kidnapping. But same thing with mine. Like, he was arrested for domestic violence. Like, he has mugshot on the paper, but he was doing great. Like, his career, he's still being booked on, and he was still completely terrorizing me through the courts. And so that was really hard to understand. And just all the complicit people who continued to book him. Judy Collins continued to tour with him. Like, didn't you hear that he was arrested for domestic violence? That was difficult. But of course, on the other side of it, that's why, for instance, yellow is the color of finding our voices. I wear a lot of colors, which I couldn't really wear in my marriage because my aunt dressed in beautiful in bright colors, and I loved my aunt. She was a poet. But every time I would wear something that was colorful, he would say, "Oh, you're turning into your Aunt Joan." It would be putting me down. So the bright colors is really to reflect the fact that on the other side of it, it really is beautiful. Freedom, just total freedom to do what I want, to say what I want, to think what I want, not to be walking on eggshells, and having agency to be able to just have my own thoughts and actions and everything.
I love that. That is so fabulous. And then now connecting with other survivors and doing amazing work. You want to talk a little bit about what you've been able to put together with the help of powerful, dynamic other women to help survivors, not only in your area, but, a long distance. Many, many women have benefited from finding our voices.
Yeah, we are statewide, and we started off with, well, the poster campaign, which was 45 Maine survivors, including our governor, stepped up to do this as well, putting ourselves out there as survivors of domestic abuse with our photos on posters and a quote. And these posters have been in more than 100 towns all over Maine, thousands of them everywhere, just breaking the silence, getting rid of the stigma and the shame. And then beyond that, through the posters, hearing from so many women all over Maine again who are really struggling because there is a big lack of resources, programs, services for women going through domestic abuse. So we've stepped up to fill in the gaps, and we have just announced that we've given out about $300,000 to women in the past 2 years of the program for things like shelter payments, car, repairs, home cameras, security system, legal bills, all about how important that is.
Yes.
We also have 35 dentists who are giving free, dignified dental care to survivors of domestic abuse, women. And they're doing things for cosmetic as well as, crisis things like a punch in the mouth. But also, we have women who were not allowed to brush their teeth, and their teeth rotted, and they're restoring their smile. And that is so beautiful. Porcelain veneers, and they come into the dental office just like any other patient. There's no stigma attached at all. Nobody knows that it's free or that what they've gone through. That's incredible. And online support groups. And then we have the book club, and I have a podcast, Let's Talk About It. So we're doing everything we can to shine a light on domestic abuse and to bring light to survivors and to connect the community of survivors. And we are just boosting each other, and also help with our voices, gathering, changing legislation. We've already done that once, and we're working on another bill to get laws passed that for once are tilted toward to try to tilt things over to the victims, because the perpetrators are the ones who have all the rights now.
It does seem that over time, the pendulum continues to swing back and forth, and we don't seem to hit a place where we just stop. It just moves, back and forth with rights for survivors or no rights for survivors, but not a whole lot of in between. I remember when I was involved in the 90s, everyone was caring about, judges were getting trained, police officers, doctors, there was a mandate for a time that women be screened when they were going to their doctors about domestic abuse, because it was so very common. And that a lot of these things have gone away. So I'm glad that at least in the state of Maine, you are making sure it's a priority and that it's not forgotten.
Well, we are very loud. Like, that's the thing. We need to be loud because we are expressing outrage, and outrage is what we need. People need to understand this is an emergency. It's a crisis. It's a public health nightmare. And we've got to start paying attention to it. And to speak about the pendulum, now the problem is that there's this whole de-incarceration movement. So everybody's out there saying no more police and also no more jails. But the only way that women can be safe from these guys is when they are behind bars.
So that's really adding to the mess, is that movement. And, we need some accountability, and we need rehabilitative programming too. We need programs for when people have served their time, but that they can still, maybe they won't change, maybe they will, but they have access to programs that hold them accountable and help teach different tools. A lot of times, those who offend against their female partner or in an intimate partner relationship have grown up in homes where that's what they learned. And so they need to have tools to teach and play ways to hold them accountable and catch them when they fall, so that there can be room for change.
There was a woman, I just took a walk with her just the other day, and she told me that her 4-year-old called her the C word.
Oh, because they'd seen it so much?
Because he was constantly calling her that. I mean, if that's not child abuse, but yet the judges do not recognize that as child abuse, unless the child has been physically harmed by the man, he's going to still be granted custody and visitation without any regard to the domestic abuse, because they consider that abuse to the woman and not to the child. This is child abuse for a child to witness, and the father treating the mother that way.
And then the child is perpetuating what the child has seen.
Exactly.
So, and when I was a social worker, and I don't know if every state is different, I will say that each state's legislative bodies are different, and how these things are handled is different in the United States. But for us in child abuse investigation back in the day, we could substantiate mental injury in rare cases where a child is developmentally no longer on par, because the trauma in the home kept them held them back, inhibited growth. And it can be so devastating to children that early on they show signs of ADHD, but it isn't that. It is that anxiety and being exposed, even to shouting, even to the constant shouting and all of that. They don't have to witness it to be impacted.
And even mothers that have children and they know that, like, the children's really nervous or have all these ailments. You think about what in utero, if the mother was terrified and terrorized, was pregnant, it did affect the child. But when you said when you were a social worker, if it was recognized, but did the judges and the courts recognize it as far as visitation and custody? Do you think they took that into account?
Definitely back in the day. It depends on the judge. It always does. It depends on the judge. It depends on the resources. It depends on what else is going, how bad it was and how well documented it was. But, supervised visitation is just a short-term solution. So, sometimes supervised visitation is put in place, but it's not sustainable for a child's lifetime. And so,
it's going to go either way, isn't it? Either they're going to lift the decision or they're going to take away the visitation.
Right. So it is a very big, hard, difficult thing for judges to deal with, because the other side of that is children need their parents, and they don't need perfect parents. They need their parents unless they're in danger. And so it is important for people at organizations such as yours, at organizations such as the one I used to work at, to teach. We used to help people become their own best advocates, to learn to document what was going on, to keep good notes. And I don't mean in a creepy way to tell kids to say this or that. I just mean to observe, to document, to make sure that they understand how protective orders work and how they don't, and to do their best. It doesn't mean there will be a perfect outcome at all,
Yeah,
but but it
we
helps.
yeah, we even have like that we hear all the time, like police, they make an arrest and they don't tell the woman, the victim, about the resources agencies in their area. They don't tell them about us and they don't tell them about the traditional domestic abuse agencies in the area. That's ridiculous.
And that I didn't, when I worked in probation work later with police officers, I did see a lot of our police officers in Alaska, in the city I lived in, because it always depends. You know, it depends on your city, the count, whatever. But I saw a lot of them giving those resources.
Yeah.
They understood that it helped them do their job much better
Yeah.
if they connected people to the resources that could help remediate the problem. So
But
anyways,
once again, we could talk forever about this, but the key thing is that as survivors, we have something very special that we can bring to the table that if you haven't been through it, you don't understand.
right, right. And I love that you're doing that. I do. And you do, you know, much of your work with survivors is in Maine, but again, the book group still that you have, the virtual book group is far reaching, and it still helps bring conversation, understanding, and support just by bringing people together. It's
It absolutely
free. If
does.
they have internet access, it's free and accessible. And I think it's a beautiful thing that you're doing. So I'm so glad I'm not glad you experienced something horrific. I'm so glad you didn't let that experience be wasted, and that
Thank
you're
you.
making big changes in your world. I just love that.
Thank you. And a lot of books, they don't even flag themselves as being about a domestic abuse. So we've uncovered quite a few, like memoirs, for instance, that don't even say on the cover.
So sometimes people experience those things so much that they didn't seem that profoundly different. And so they didn't call it abuse because I heard this at a family reunion after I'd written my own book. A family member said, hey, you know, we didn't call it abuse as I was growing up. We just called it as it was. That was just how life was. And that is true. Those were our norms. But the neat thing is even though we haven't maybe changed fully enough, we've made great changes that we can call it out now, that we can point people to resources when they're available. That is a
Well,
beautiful thing.
it is beautiful and so much more work to do because we're doing work in the high schools and we're talking to high school students and they're saying that when they're dating, it's an expected thing that they give their boyfriend the passwords to all their social media. And they don't think anything's wrong with that. They also, choking during sex is become a thing where it's happening a lot with teenagers. They don't even realize that the name for that is strangulation. I mean,
Right.
there's so many things that are going on that are normalized that are absolutely not okay.
And it's good that you brought up about the social media because it's still going on. These things are still going on, but unless we tell people, hey, you have the right to your own privacy, you have the right to say no to things, you have, you know, they just won't just surmise that on their own. You
Right.
know, they won't surmise it on their own. So that's why it's so important that the work that you're doing is shining a light on, you know, certainly red flags in a relationship, but green flags also, which
Yeah.
are, you know, because there are some really healthy relationships and some amazing young men and older men and all of that. And so we want people to understand you deserve the best. You deserve to feel your best in a relationship. And certainly you should feel very safe and loved.
Yeah. Christine Buckley, who's in on a poster, she does a ton of things with us. We were talking about next year having a float, a Finding Our Voices float in the local Christmas parade. And that's what we came up with, red and what she did, red and green flags. So for
I love it.
colors, and absolutely show the red flags, but also show the green flags, also show what a healthy relationship looks like.
Right. They're out there and I love and celebrate them. And you know, I have some friends, I look at their relationships and I think, oh, that would be amazing. Not to say that it's perfect, easy, or anything like that. But if someone helps inspire you to be your best self, that's awesome.
That is
And it can happen.
that's
So
awesome. And the other flip side of that is don't always take anything at face value. And like I thought at the time when I was in my own thing that everybody else had a great relationship and it was only happening to me. But we have to realize that people put facades up, and what is like a lot of times when people will say like, oh, don't they have an incredible relationship? I'll say maybe. Like you unless you're in it, you really don't know.
right, right. And sometimes when we're in the middle of those toxic or bad or abusive relationships, we ourselves may say things that don't reflect the accuracy. We're not trying to lie, but I do remember when I was young, as an example, Valentine's Day came and there was nothing as usual. That from my husband and I went to work. I was a young person in her early 20s, and someone asked what my husband had done for me. And I said, well, he's not big on holidays, but he's so great all the other times that it's just fine. And I look back on that and I think I should have spontaneously combusted. I said, I said what I wished were true because I didn't want to humiliate him or me. But the
Yes.
fact of the matter is that was a coping mechanism. That was never the truth.
Yeah, I think I said the exact same thing.
It's not a good feeling. Sometimes I look back and I have my own issues where I'm like, I wish I'd have said something or handled that a little more honestly back when I was going through it, but it's okay.
Yeah.
So where can people find you and learn more about Finding Our Voices and your other work?
Findingourvoices.net is our website, and there's a lot that you can see and you hear, read. And that's also a way to find out about our book club. And you can also access my podcast, the Let's Talk About It podcast.
I love it. All right. Thank you so much for the work that you do and for being here. And so fun to connect at your book group recently. So I just loved meeting you, Patricia. Let's stay in touch.
So glad we are connected. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed Patricia as much as I thought you would. Next week, we will have Dr. Fidel Sebaizi, from someone who left a massacre that went on in the Congo in a United Nations refugee camp to now an esteemed police officer in Abilene, Texas, and someone who's written a book, Creating a Life from the Ashes. There is nothing that he can't accomplish. What he has to say about surviving and creating a thriving life in a new country after unimaginable things happened are pretty incredible. And of course, now he has a PhD. There is probably no one who appreciates an education in the way that he has. So he's using it to better his community in Abilene. I'm excited. And so tune in next week, 2 weeks from now, to hear Dr. Fidel Sebaizi, and have a fabulous week.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's show. Thank you so much for listening. Now, to find out more, head on over to lameredith.com and be sure to hop on the mailing list too. If you've enjoyed this show, please leave a rating and review or share with a friend. And if you really, really liked it, go ahead and subscribe so that you never miss another episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Persistence U with Lisbeth.